Hey, aloha. So back in January, we did a sermon series on the most important job for the local church. And this would be the most important job for every and any local church. And that would be to make efforts to carry out the Great Commission. And so, just as a reminder, what is the Great Commission? And, there's different ways that you can explain it. There's different ways that you can word it. But here's how we worded it back in January. We just basically said that the Great Commission involves two main things. First of all, it's encouraging unbelievers to trust in Jesus. And the second thing, it's encouraging believers, especially believers in your local church. It's encouraging believers to grow in their Christian faith. So the Bible, all throughout the Bible, it teaches that spiritually, there's only two different kinds of people in this world. And when I say all throughout the Bible, this is something that we find at the very beginning in the early chapters of Genesis, even to the latter chapters of the book of Revelation. So it's all throughout the Bible, but there's only two different kinds of people spiritually. And that would be those who are God's people and those who are not. It would be those who trust in God or who trust in Jesus, which we would call believers, or more specifically, Christian believers. And it would be those who don't trust in God or who don't trust in Jesus. And this is what we'd refer to as unbelievers. So again, the Great Commission, it involves encouraging unbelievers to trust in Jesus and encouraging believers to grow in their Christian faith. That's about as simple as I can put it. That's what the Great Commission is in a nutshell. So according to the Bible, this is supposed to be the main job of every local church. Everything we do as a church should ultimately work together for this particular purpose. And so if we're doing anything that's not pointing people in this direction, or at least the efforts aren't pointing in this direction, then we really shouldn't be doing it. So again, the Great Commission involves encouraging unbelievers to trust in Jesus and encouraging believers to grow in their Christian faith. This is what the Bible calls making disciples, or making disciples of Jesus. Now, the word that we often use in churches to describe encouraging unbelievers to trust in Jesus is the word evangelism. And the word we often use in churches to describe encouraging believers to grow in their Christian faith is what we would call discipleship. Now, what's interesting here is that part of what discipleship involves is growing in your involvement with evangelism. So discipleship is actually a part of all of it. But just to keep it simple, evangelism is encouraging unbelievers to trust in Jesus, and discipleship is encouraging believers to grow in their Christian faith. Now, one of the things that we had in the bulletin today, if you had been here to pick one up, is it said there that this that we're going to be, well, basically today what we're doing, we're starting a new series in evangelism. And so in the bulletin, I don't think it said in the bulletin that we're starting that series, but it says this is the first part of that series. So and it also says that this is going to be a 5-part series. But since I sent all of that out, I really decided to make it a 6-part series. There's actually a topic in evangelism that I wanted to talk about that I didn't exactly leave out, but I think I tried to combine it in another session. It was going to be too much, so I just decided to go ahead and make this a 6-part series. So this is part 1 of 6 that we're going to be doing on a series in evangelism. Now, one of the things that we as Southern Baptist churches have been really good at historically is evangelism. That's really what we're known for. If you were to ask, certain church leaders in a different denomination, What do you think of when you think of Southern Baptists? There's a good chance they may say, yeah, Southern Baptists have been all about evangelism. And, if you're good at evangelism, then you're going to have a lot of people. That is, you're going to have big numbers. In fact, in America, Southern Baptists have made up the largest number of Protestants. That is, Southern Baptists have been the largest Protestant denomination in America over the years. Although we're not actually a denomination, we're a convention, but we're not the Southern Baptist denomination, we're the Southern Baptist Convention. That's another story for another time. We won't get into that today. But Southern Baptists, they've been the largest Protestant group in America, especially in the South. One of the things I pointed out this morning is that Texas is a really big state with a lot of people. And I heard at one time that 50% of the people who lived in Texas claimed to be a Southern Baptist. That's incredible. That it would be that big a percentage in such a big state like that. I'm not sure that that's really true today, but at least within the past 20 years, I think I had heard that figure. But again, over the years, Southern Baptists have been very, very good at evangelism. So how good have we been as Southern Baptists with evangelism? For me personally, to answer that, I would say, well, I think we've been pretty good, but I'm not sure how good we've been. The numbers may present Southern Baptists as being better at evangelism than we've actually been. Let me just say that we've put a lot of emphasis on evangelism over the years. So much emphasis that it's been said that we've kind of neglected the discipleship side of the Great Commission. And that would include effectively training our people in evangelism. So if we as Southern Baptist churches were to push and encourage evangelism, but we didn't effectively train our people in evangelism, what would end up happening would be that evangelism would get forced. It would get forced upon people, and that's not a good thing. And the numbers of people actually trusting in Jesus may not be near as high as those who claim to trust in him. So, if that were to happen, if we were to just really push evangelism and not really train our people as to what we're doing, then we might try to rush things with evangelism to the point where we get pushy. Have you ever seen anybody that's kind of a pushy Christian? Hopefully you haven't, or you haven't seen it too much, but I've seen it in my lifetime. It's not a good thing. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to be pushy with your faith. Also, people could decide to trust in Jesus, or they think they're trusting in Jesus, but they don't really understand what it is that they're doing. Okay, so it's really easy. If somebody gets so gung-ho on evangelism, they may put more emphasis on the numbers of evangelism. We got to get so many people and celebrate that. Maybe, you know how people are with a sinful nature. We all have a sinful nature. We can get to the point where we're like, some people may want to have higher numbers than the next church downtown or down the street or whatever, and that's completely losing. That would be completely losing our focus if we were to do something like that. It would be doing the right thing for the wrong reason. So anyway, if we as churches, if we as Christians were to start doing that, just really pushing evangelism, just trying to get the numbers, we might just want to hear somebody say, yeah, I trust in Jesus, without them fully understanding what it is that they're doing. And if that's the case, then they may not really even be trusting in Jesus, although they think they are. It's real easy for somebody to paint a rosy picture and try to say, who wants to go to heaven after they die? Or Jesus loves you. Do you love him too? You can especially do this with little kids, and a little kid's going to go, oh yeah, I want to go to heaven, or yeah, I want to be with Jesus if he loves me, maybe he's real nice, and we just don't want to do that. We want to make sure that people really understand what the gospel is all about. We want to make sure they really understand what Jesus is all about. We don't want people to be confused. So we don't want to rush things. We don't want to take our time and not be intentional. But at the same time, we don't want to rush things so fast that people don't even understand what they're doing. And so therefore they wouldn't really even be committing their lives truly to Christ. Also, if we're really pushing evangelism and not spending as much emphasis on discipleship, we might end up trying to take shortcuts. So instead of teaching our people how to evangelize effectively, instead of our people, teaching our people how to have meaningful spiritual conversations with unbelievers or meaningful gospel conversations with unbelievers, we might just say, hey, let's just have our people send unbelievers to those who can have those conversations. So I don't know what to tell you, but this guy over here knows. Or I'm going to send you over to our pastor, and he can tell you. Don't depend on me to explain anything to you. So we that's not a bad thing necessarily, but you want to be able, as a Christian believer, you want to be able to share some things with them. You want to be able to talk to them about the gospel. Or something else that can happen that has happened over the years, where people don't really feel like that they can share the gospel, is they'll say, hey, why don't you just come to a church service and hear the gospel there? Or you're just simply inviting them to a worship service, or you invite them to a revival service or some other evangelistic event. This there's nothing wrong with doing these things, saying, hey, why don't you talk to our pastor? Or hey, why don't you talk to this other person at the church? Or hey, why don't you come to this event at church? Nothing wrong with that. Those are all good things. As a pastor, I don't want to send you the wrong message here. I love to talk to people about spiritual matters and about the gospel. And if you wanted me to talk with somebody, I would more than welcome that. If you'd already talked with them and you just wanted me to follow up with your conversation with them and me talk to them as well, I would love to do that. And I would encourage you to have me be a part of that. And it's great to invite people to church events, but what my point here in all this is, it's also important for you personally to learn how to be more involved in evangelism and to have meaningful spiritual conversations with people. You want to be able to do that. You don't want to just always just pass it off to somebody else, kind of like, I don't know what to say, just go to this event, or I don't know what to say, just go talk to this person. You want to be able to talk with them as well, and to get better at it over time and to get more comfortable with it. Surveys have shown that 50% of Southern Baptists rarely, if ever, share their Christian faith or have spiritual conversations. And guys, that's not healthy. We all want to be sharing our faith with people. Several years ago, I was a member at a church in Kentucky, and we had a guest speaker one day from a church in Bowling Green, there in Kentucky, and he was an associate pastor at a pretty large church. He may have even been what's called an evangelism pastor. This church was one of the top Southern Baptist evangelism churches in the state. And, there were a lot of people who were trusting in Jesus, a lot of people joining that church throughout the year. And so they were considered a very healthy evangelistic church. But when this pastor was speaking, there was something he mentioned that day that I thought was kind of odd. It just didn't line up with the whole picture. And I wasn't sure if other people there caught the significance of what he said. But he basically said that there are many people at our church who don't share their faith in spiritual conversations. And they talked with them, and there were people within their church that told them this. They said, yeah, we just don't do it. And he said, I would guess that up to 90 to 95% of our people here at this church do not share their faith, in spiritual conversations. And, when I heard him say this, I thought, man, that is remarkable, because this church had very high evangelism numbers. And, typically, you'd have to have a lot of people involved in evangelism to have numbers as high as they did. Basically, what he was saying was that they could only see, the church leadership there at that church, they could only see about 5 to 10% of their members actively getting involved in evangelistic conversations. And so my thoughts were, this church wasn't really as healthy as a lot of people thought it was. In other words, it wasn't as evangelistically healthy as a lot of people thought. A healthy evangelistic church is not only going to see people trusting in Jesus. I mean, you're going to see, if you're doing evangelism in a healthy way, you're going to see people, trust in Jesus. That's going to happen. But the numbers aren't as important as the numbers of people coming to Jesus aren't as important as the number of people in the church getting involved with evangelism. That's what's most important, to be faithful in what God has called you to do. What's most important is a significant number of people in the church are going to be actively involved in spiritual conversations with unbelievers. That is what a healthy evangelistic church is. Okay, that's more important than the actual numbers of people, saying that, hey, we've trusted in Jesus. And so I say all of that to say this: it's important for you as a Christian believer to grow in your ability of sharing your Christian faith with unbelievers. But it's also important for the church to train its people how to do it effectively. So what we're going to try to do here is we're going to try to talk about ways to help you grow in your evangelism over the next several weeks. Today, we're going to look at a passage that is often quoted, it's often memorized, and it comes out of Romans chapter 10. It's Romans chapter 10, verses 13 to 15. We'll read it here in just a moment. But before we do, let me just say that in Romans chapter 10, Paul says that anyone can get their life right with God. Okay, that's really important to know. Anybody can be forgiven of their sins. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you've done. But the key is they've got to trust in Jesus. Okay, that is what is so important. They've got to trust in Jesus. And there's no way that they can trust in Jesus unless they hear about Jesus and his good news message. Good news message would be the gospel message. And so it's part of God's design for his people, that is the church, to take the gospel message to unbelievers in this world and to be intentional about it. Okay, so let's just look at what Paul says here in these verses. So it's Romans chapter 10. We're going to start in verse 13. We'll read down to verse 15. Paul says here, "For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? And how are they to preach unless they are sent? As it's written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news." So let's just look at this, go back over these verses for just a moment and think about what it's saying here. So in verse 13, it says, everyone who calls on Jesus to make them right with God and to forgive them of their sins, everyone who trusts in Jesus to do this, everyone who does this and sincerely means it, it's saying here that Jesus will spiritually save them. Jesus will make them right with God right now. And Jesus will begin to help them in their spiritual walk to live the way that God wants them to live right now. He's going to help them with that. He's going to forgive them of their sins right now. And he's going to save them from the punishment of hell later. And we move on here into verse 14, and it basically says this: they can only trust in Jesus if they've heard about him. And they can only hear about him if somebody preaches to them. Now, I want to just stop and pause here for just a moment and talk a little bit about what does it mean to preach? what does it mean to preach at someone? Or, that almost seems like you're forcing something down their throat. That's not what it means to preach at somebody here in this context. So let's talk about it. What does it mean to preach? There's some people who understand this as only being a pastor preaching to them in a church service. I actually, several years ago, I was talking to a guy, and he understood it that way. He told me, he said, this verse is saying that unless you hear the gospel message from a gospel called preacher in a pulpit, there's no way you can be saved. And I was like, man, you're misunderstanding this. That's not what this means. I mean, it can mean that, but it's not exclusive to that, but this guy, he did not want to talk about it. His mind was set, and, you don't want to argue with somebody like that because it's just not going to do any good. He was also convinced that you had to literally hear the gospel from a gospel called preacher. And I asked him, I said, well, what about somebody who's deaf? Because there are deaf people that have given their life to the Lord. And he kind of thought about it for a minute, and he said, well, I'm convinced that if a deaf person comes to know the Lord, God will somehow miraculously open up their ears so they can literally hear the gospel, and then they'll become deaf again. And, I just, goodness, that's not what this means. That is stretching the literalism of this just a little bit too far. The literal meaning is that if they receive, if someone communicates the gospel to them and encourages them to accept it, that is what it means that they hear God's preaching, even if it's written, so anyway, that's a misunderstanding to say that only a pastor preaching to someone in a church service is what preaching is. Preaching here in this context is any believer proclaiming the gospel and encouraging them to trust in Jesus. And again, it can be spoken or it can be written, or you can make sign language. You could speak this in sign language. So any way that it's communicated. That's how someone, by the way, if they're reading, like just reading the Bible, that's how that can lead to someone's spiritual salvation. Now, moving on to verse 15, it says, someone can only encourage others to trust in Jesus if they've gone to them and made an effort in some way, and oftentimes it's intentionally making an effort to try to share the gospel message with them eventually. And it says also in verse 15, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news. And of course, the good news here is the gospel of Jesus. So we might say how beautiful it is when someone intentionally makes the effort to go out to people in the world to encourage them to trust in Jesus. And so it's really important for every Christian believer to get involved with evangelism, to personally get involved with encouraging unbelievers to trust in Jesus. But I want to say, though, I think this whole endeavor can be quite intimidating, and I think it's why a lot of Christian believers maybe don't do it as much as they want to. It can be kind of intimidating to go out and share the gospel with people. And someone might say, well, why? Well, why is it intimidating? Is it because you're afraid of your Christian faith? Are you ashamed of it? Sometimes people will try to put that guilt trip on someone. They'll say, well, You're just ashamed of the gospel. That's why you won't share your faith. But I really don't believe that. I don't think that that's that big of an issue. True believers, they love Jesus and they want other people to know him too. I think the real issue is that many Christians don't understand the right way to go about sharing their faith. They just don't know exactly how to do it. And I don't think they really understand how to have spiritual conversations the right way. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to help you with that over the next several weeks. We're going to try to talk a little bit about this, of how can we go about learning how to share our faith in a way that just seems right. Okay, so let's just start off very, very simple today. The most important thing is that you know how to share the gospel message. That's the most important thing in evangelism. Now, aside from other things being most important, like you want to trust in God to do the work, not in yourself. You want to pray, which is part of that. You're asking God to do things that you cannot do on your own. I get that. That's definitely most important. You want to be this is to be an act of worship for you. God, I'm giving myself to you. I'm submitting myself to you. That's why I agree. That's more important. But what I mean in terms of you actually doing it, what's most important is that you understand what the gospel message is. So my question to you would be, do you know how to do that? Do you know how to share the gospel message? If somebody were to walk up to you and ask you, what is the gospel message? Are you ready to be able to share with them? Do you know what to say? What would you say? There's a pastor friend of mine over in Oahu, and he said that their church, before anyone goes on a mission trip, he said they need to be able to demonstrate that they can share their faith, be able to share the gospel. And we both kind of chuckled when he said that, because that's the whole point, right? If you're going on a mission trip, you want to be able to serve people in a lot of different ways, but ultimately what you want to be able to do is hopefully get to a point where you can share the gospel, right? So yeah, I agreed with them. If somebody goes on a mission trip, they definitely need to know how to share the gospel or to share their faith. So as we move towards closing today, I just want to give you 4 points of the gospel message. And this is, what I'm going to give you is basically a simple outline of the gospel. What you might want to do is you might want to just write these 4 points down. You can stop the video if you want and jot them down. These 4 points I'm going to give you, they can be worded differently. You don't have to word them exactly the way I do. You might even have more than 4 points. Maybe you could have less than 4 points. But what's most important here is that you have some kind of a guideline, some kind of an outline in your head, in your mind, that you can think about, that you can follow when you're sharing the gospel with someone. So again, I'm going to give you a 4-point outline that you can just simply use as a tool to help you. And then I'm going to give you a few suggestions to help you to remember what to say and maybe how to encourage someone to trust in Jesus. So the first point of the gospel message I want to give you is this: there is a God who made you. There is a God who made you. And of course, this answers the question of how we as people got here. It answers the question how we exist. There's an almighty God who made this universe, and he made you, and he made me, he made all of us. Now, there's some people, they like to start off the gospel message by saying that there's a God who loves you, and maybe you've heard that before. And I just want to say it's true. There is a God who loves you, and that is really nice to know. But I don't like to start there. I don't like to start with a message that there's a God who loves you. And the reason is because you got a lot of people out there who might respond to that by saying, well, I don't care. I don't care if there's a God who loves me, or I don't care that who your God is and that he loves me. And furthermore, your gospel message, it doesn't have anything to do with me. Right? So I don't need to hear this. But when you say that there's a God who made you, that makes things a little bit different. That doesn't mean that they're gonna. It doesn't mean that they're gonna say, "Oh, well, I need to hear it now." They may still not want to have anything to do with it, but I think it sets the stage a little bit differently. You see, when you say there's a God who made you, now the gospel has everything to do with them. It doesn't matter who you are, the gospel has something to do with you. Everyone has been created by God. Therefore, everyone has a relationship with this God as being a creature of the Almighty Creator. And you can't get out of that. You can't say, well, I don't want to have anything to do with that. You can't change that to say, I'm not going to be your creature anymore. You can't say that. That'd be as ridiculous as saying, well, water is just not going to be wet anymore. No, that's the whole point. It is wet, right? We are creatures of the Almighty Creator. And so if God has a message for you, if your Creator has a message for you, if he says that there's something wrong with your relationship with him, if he says that there's going to be negative consequences if your relationship with him is not made right, then it's very important that you hear this gospel message from God. So again, first point, there is a God who made you, and he does love you as well. But the key thing at this point, there's a God who made you. A second point of the gospel message is this: we all have a sin problem. We all have a sin problem. Now, you may have noticed that I didn't say you have a sin problem, but I said we all have a sin problem. The reason I like to word it a little bit different on this point is because you don't want to sound like you're talking down to someone, as if they're so bad and you're so good, or something of that nature. We all have a sin problem, right? We're all in the same boat. So we're not talking down to anybody. This is just part of the gospel message. The Bible tells us that we've got a sin problem. And so, the next big question we want to make sure that we understand is, what is sin exactly? And sin is disobeying God in any way. But it's deeper than that. It's trusting in anything else to ultimately give you comfort or direction. Can we seek direction through things? Absolutely. Can we seek comfort in things? Absolutely. But where is your ultimate comfort? Where is your ultimate direction found? And it should be with God. And if it's not, then you're trusting in something else above him. And that is a type of sin. We're all guilty of that. Now, the reason why sin is a problem is because it leads to all other kinds of problems in life. I mean, all kinds of problems, relationship problems. Just any kind of problem you can think of. Sin is really at its source at the very end. That could be a whole nother discussion. But the sin leads to all kinds of other problems in our lives. Ultimately, it leads to our eternal punishment if we don't get it fixed. Sin's a problem because it's an instinctive nature within us. We're born with it. We just can't fix it on our own, no matter how hard we try. We can't make ourselves right with God on our own. So we all have a sin problem. Okay, here's a third point of the gospel message. Only Jesus can fix your sin problem. Only Jesus can fix your sin problem. God sent Jesus into the world. In fact, Jesus is God. Well, how is he God? If he sent himself, that's a whole nother thing to talk about. But yeah, God sent Jesus into the world, and Jesus actually is God. God came into the world as a man. He was still God, but also a man, as Jesus. The sole purpose of Jesus coming into the world was to fix the sin problem of many people. Okay? And only he can fix someone's sin problem. He was able to do that when he died on the cross, and he proved that he was powerful to do it, or he was powerful enough to do it when he rose from the grave. So only Jesus can fix your sin problem. And then finally, here's a fourth point of the gospel message, and that is Jesus only fixes the sin problem of those who trust in him. Jesus only fixes the sin problem of those who trust in him. The Bible is very clear about this. Now, there does appear to be an exception for those who are not able to understand the difference between good and evil. So, for example, with infants, younger children, and you might say those who are mentally impaired. As far as, we're talking about younger children, well, what age are they able to understand the difference between good and evil? I think it depends on each individual person. I don't think that there's this one age where everybody understands the difference. I think for some people they can be younger, for others they can be older. So, but the point is, for those who do understand the difference between good and evil, the Bible is clear that only those who trust in Jesus will have their sin problem fixed. So another good question to think about, to ask, and to be prepared for is, what exactly does it mean to trust in Jesus? I like to think of it that you trust him as a prophet, priest, and king. So that's kind of in the Bible. It is in the Bible. Jesus is referred to as prophet, priest, and king. Some of the old hymns will sing of Jesus in this way. And I like to think of it that you trust Jesus as a prophet, and you trust him as a priest, and you trust him as a king. This is what it means to trust in Jesus. So as a prophet, you trust that he always tells the truth, and he always keeps his promises. And his truth and his promises are found in the Bible. Okay? As a priest, you trust that only he can bring you spiritual salvation. And you trust that he will. Why? Because he's promised you. And you trust him as a prophet. You trust that he keeps his promises. Okay? And then also you trust him as a king. You trust him enough to want to do what he says, and that you see evidence in your life for doing this. You trust him enough to obey him. Of course, you're not going to obey him perfectly, but you're going to want to, and you're going to see some evidence in your life that's consistent that you are trusting him enough to obey him. Jesus only fixes the sin problem of those who trust in him. So that's the gospel in 4 points I wanted to share with you. So let me just close by giving you a few suggestions for presenting the gospel and encouraging someone to accept it. And the first suggestion would be, memorize a gospel outline. Okay? Memorize a gospel outline. And I would say memorize whatever works for you. The one I've given to you, these 4 points, memorize that if it helps you. Or memorize a different one. If you don't like that one, if you want to use one that's different, memorize one that works for you. You might even say to yourself, I don't know if I can memorize sentences like that. Maybe I just need to memorize words or phrases or something like that. You just want a framework, in your mind that you can follow. Like, okay, here's the first point, here's the next point, here's the next one, here's the next one. You might memorize words like, okay, the first point is Creator God. The second point is sent. The third point is Jesus. The fourth point is faith or trust in Jesus, something like that. Some people like to come up with little, some kind of a word, that spells something like SNAP, SNAP. I just made that up. I don't know. I don't have anything like that for you to some little, maybe you can come up with one. What about the 4 S's for salvation? The first one is your start, where God created you. The second one is sin. The third one is Savior. Jesus comes as your Savior. Fourth is seek. The only people Jesus saves are those who trust in him, those who seek him truly. Come up with whatever works for you. The key is not exactly what you use, the tool that you use to remember it. The key is that you remember it. You use something that'll help you. Okay. And what you want to do is, whenever you come up with something, you want to recite it often to yourself so that, man, I've got it. Do it often. And you might do it when you're driving down the road. You might do it when you're walking. You might do it when you're taking a shower. You might do it when you're doing some kind of a job that doesn't require much thinking, like if you're mowing the grass or vacuuming the carpet or painting a fence or anything. Just try to find some times where you're thinking about that often. Use it, whatever you use it as a tool to help you progress in your gospel presentation. Memorize a gospel outline. A second suggestion I would have for you is to continue to learn more about the details to your gospel outline throughout the rest of your life. Okay, continue to learn more about the details to your gospel outline throughout the rest of your life. That is just learning more about the biblical message, learning more about the gospel message in detail. Be able to answer more detailed questions about your gospel message, more detailed questions about God and who he is and his nature and what it means for Jesus to be God and yet be sent from God. That's getting into the Trinity. What is the Trinity? How is God one God and yet 3 persons? How is that possible? Talking about creation, talking about sin. What exactly is sin? What does it lead to? What's the problem of sin? To be able to talk about Jesus coming to the world. How is he fully God and fully man? What is the work of Jesus? What is the work of the Holy Spirit? All these types of things. What exactly happened when Jesus died on the cross? Why did he have to die? What's important about him rising from the dead? What exactly is faith in Jesus? How do I express my faith? These are just all questions. How does the church play a part in all of this? How are things going to end up in the end of the age and the future of eternity? These are things that you just continue to build upon for the rest of your life, kind of learning these things. And we have the answers in the Bible. And so that's what I would encourage you to do is read the Bible, study it, get familiar with it, understand what it says, and listening to sermons from pastors. Hopefully you can learn quite a bit about a lot of these things. Be a part of a small group like a Sunday school or something, some other type of small group where you can have discussion. You can read certain materials by trusted theologians and pastors, and you can get a good bit of information there as well. So continue to learn more about the details to your gospel outline throughout the rest of your life. And then finally, I would suggest know when to encourage someone to trust in Jesus. Know when to encourage someone to trust in Jesus. Before you encourage somebody to trust in Jesus and the gospel, make sure they understand it first. Okay, don't just run through the gospel and say, "Hey, do you want to accept the gospel?" Or I want you to trust in Jesus. Before you don't rush it. Make sure that somebody understands what it is that they've just heard, and that means you're going to have to ask them some questions. There's going to have to be some dialogue to kind of see where they're at and their understanding, and to see where they're at and what they believe. You might ask them as you go through each point. Does that make sense to you? Do you understand this? What do you think about it? Do you believe in that? Do you believe that there is a God who made us? Some people may say, I'm not real sure yet. I'm still trying to work through that. Okay. Or Or somebody might say, oh yeah, I don't have any problem with that one, but this thing about sin, that one I'm still kind of working through, right? So you want to ask them questions, see where they're at, make sure they understand the gospel, see if they believe in the gospel as you're going through it. Now, if you get through the gospel, you present the gospel and you find out they do believe it, then you want to encourage them with some next steps. As far as being a part of a church and being part of encouraging one another as a church to grow in our Christian faith together. So you want to be able to point them in that direction. We're not going to get into all that today. We're not even going to get into that in our series here. Maybe we can talk about that sometime later. But if you were to get into a circumstance like that where you presented the gospel, they believed in it, I would encourage you to talk with me about it or have them talk with me as far as what to do next. But that's awesome if that were to happen. But you, as we mentioned a moment ago, you might share the gospel with them. They've listened to you and you've asked them, what do you believe about that? And they say, well, I'm still not sure about this point over here. How do you leave that? What I would say is, I would say, well, you just gently want to encourage them to believe in the gospel. You might say, well, I just want you to know that, I believe in the gospel. I've seen a lot of positive things in my life from it. And I just want to encourage you to trust in Jesus. But, if you do one day, if you trust in him, I just want to ask if you would contact me, let me know about that, because I'd like to talk with you more about it. Something like that. That's how I would encourage you to do that. But as we close here, are you prepared to share the gospel? You may be somebody like, yeah, I think so. And my encouragement to that is, continue to learn more about the details of the gospel. We can never learn enough on that. You can continue to grow in your knowledge on that. And if you feel like, man, I'm not where I need to be, then get there. Start memorizing a gospel outline and get familiar with it so that you can, go through the basics with somebody if you need to. And then you may be somebody listening to this who may say, hey, Pastor, you're telling me to share the gospel, but I've never even accepted the gospel. So we've presented the gospel here in this video. And as I said a moment ago, if you haven't accepted the gospel, if you've never trusted in Jesus, I would encourage you to do that. And I would encourage you to contact me and let me know so I could talk with you a little bit more about that. But anyway, guys, it was good to be with you today. I look forward to talking with you more about evangelism. In the next video, we're going to talk a little bit more about what does it mean to share my testimony and how is that different or similar to sharing the gospel. So we'll, and then the following videos, the following sessions, we'll be talking about how do you get to these spiritual conversations? How do you work your way to it where it's natural and those types of things. So look forward to seeing you in the weeks to come.